Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is our last video for section 2.3. And again, it has to do with what the previous video dealt with, and that's decomposition of functions. You are given a function h of x, and you're told that it was created by taking f and composing it with g. And you want to, or what you're being asked to give me, you're being asked to give me what f of x is, and you're being asked to give me what g of x is. Now, pretty much like the last video, and if you haven't watched the previous video, you really should, because I went into a lot more explanation there about what we're doing here. This is just more examples. But if you look at the way this is written, h of x was created by composing f and g, and we started with g of x, and then we ended with f. Well, g of x, I always suggest that my students look inside the parens to find g of x. That's the function you're starting with. Well, inside the parens here we see the function x plus 2. So g of x is x plus 2. That's pretty easy. Now, f of x is what happens to the x plus 2. And look what happens. Input cubed minus 7 times the input squared plus 3 times the input minus 1. Okay, let me say that again. Input cubed minus 7 times the input squared plus 3 times the input minus 1. And remember, in higher level math, input usually just takes on the simple name x. So this first part would become input cubed would become x cubed, minus this part, there would be a 7 because it's in the formula, and input squared would become x squared. The next part of the formula would become plus 3. Input is called x, and then at the end we have a negative 1. So my function f of x would be x cubed minus 7x squared plus 3x minus 1. And if you wanted to test it, you could do that by putting this, x plus 2, in the place of x every place you saw it up here, and you would find out that you would come up with h of x. So that's a good way to test to make sure that you've done it correctly. Okay, and our last example, kind of ugly looking, but before I start it, I'm going to rewrite h, okay? This caret means raised to the, and 0.5 is a half. Raising something to the 1/2 power is the same as taking the square root of it. That's an important rule from your previous course. Raising something to the 1/2 power means to take the square root of it. Under the radical, I have an x minus 5, and I have an x plus 2. Now in the original problem, they're in separate parens, but I'm going to be honest with you, to make your life easier, they're both under the radical. Correct? X minus 5 divided by x plus 2 is under the radical. What I'm going to do in this problem to make my life easier, to help me answer this question, I'm going to put one big set of parens around this rational function under here. And that helps me identify g of x. So, remember, f of x is not what you start with. G of x is what you start with. The problem tells me that. F composed with g, I start with g of x. G of x is the function inside parens. So that would be x minus 5 divided by x plus 2. Now, what's f of x? Well, f of x is what happens to this. And what happens to it is we are taking the square root of it. We are taking the square root of it, and the best thing to call it as a placeholder is x. So this is g of x, this is f of x. And we're done. You can always test it. If you put this quantity in the place of that x, in other words, if you compose these two functions in that order, If G goes into F, you will end up with H. And that's exactly what you were asked. What F and what G, what F of X and what G of X do you need to use so that if you compose them you would come up with H of X? So the trick to this problem, well, not so much a trick, remembering that raising something to the 0.5 power is taking the square root, and that what was under the radical should be considered one grouping. So we put it in parens, and that helps us find G of X. And we're done. This is technically the end of 2.3 for the videos, but I know you have a lot of work to do on Course Compass and rewatching the videos, and if you're in my 1105 class, Mr. Salix, you're doing the online quizzes as well, so you got plenty to keep you going.